I just needed to get a drink of water. Sometimes I was talking, my throat gets a bit dry, and I'm like, so I just had to take some water. I could have just paused the video, but anyway. Sorry, I just stopped right in the middle of what I was saying. Start again on this new video. So I'll go back on what I said, just so it's, yeah. One of you said that you struggle a bit with the way dimensional models talk about traits. Ultimately, the characteristics of neurodevelopmental conditions exist wide across populations because humans share a finite array of cognitive expressions. If as this model is proven to be correct, but autism is an extreme manifestation of autistic personality, you wonder if both would still be thought of as a distinct category, unrelated traits shared across the population. So yeah, so I agree. Autism is a human condition, so it stands to reason that the characteristics seen in autism, such as a need for routine, sensory issues, some differences in socialising, etc., might be seen to lesser degrees in the general population. Because autism is a human condition, that's kind of inevitable. But I agree with you that it may be a mistake to kind of label anyone, to label it necessarily as autistic traits. So, like, you might have, say, an average member of the public, say, who has a very strong need for routine, which is often quite common among particularly introverted people who often are like creatures of habit and like routine and find being around people very socially draining and so on. I think it would be a mistake to say, oh, they've got autistic traits and to label that using clinical language, because it might not be anything to do with autism. Like, the need for routine exists for many different reasons, and it's not always connected to what causes autism. And I think because we still don't really know much about autism, we're still a long way off from really understanding what causes autism. I think we do need to be really careful about that. So I do think that autism, for traits, I do think that there's some people who have a kind of autistic-like personality, and these people will be very close to the diagnostic threshold, but just beneath it. So they're not impaired. And I would agree with Darko that maybe it's because they happen to have very good cognitive compensation, and maybe it is accurate to describe these people as having an autistic personality. But I think because they have a high number of autistic traits. But I do think that we need to be careful about talking about the traits as more widely dispersed in the population, describing them, like, for example, someone who's essentially completely neurotypical and who just has a particular need for routine, but, it's a bit far-fetched to describe them as having an autistic trait, I think, because a need for routine is a human need, but it exists for many different reasons, and in autism it's not just a need for routine. It's like a whole kind of syndrome, and yeah, it's a whole syndrome thing, and it comes from this very specific sort of neurological impediment. So yeah, I agree with you. We need to be careful about that, and also, of course, it risks trivialising autism, and everyone says, oh, everyone's a little bit autistic, which isn't the case. Just because arguably there is such a thing as an autistic personality, which I do think exists, and that would be maybe for people who are very clearly different and maybe a bit odd socially, but are functioning really well, and so don't meet the criteria for autism. They're just beneath the criteria, basically. Yeah, the next level down. Because obviously, it's not a black and white thing, obviously, and psychiatrists have to make decisions all the time. It's going to be a group of people who don't quite meet the criteria, but who still, are very autistic-like in their behaviour, but just aren't impaired enough. And it makes sense to describe them as having an autistic-like personality, and that being a genuine thing, this kind of wider dimension. But it doesn't follow from that every single person in the population has autistic traits. That's where we need to be careful, I think, because that's not the case. I'm trying to think of another thing. Another condition. Yeah, I mean, I suppose any condition, any symptom of any condition can occur in anyone just because it's a human condition. But for symptoms of any condition, although they can occur in anyone, can occur for different reasons without being related to the said condition. You know, a symptom doesn't tell you anything because it can be caused by different things, can't it? So yeah, that's a good point. Another one of you makes a point about decompensation in people with very high IQs. So you say that people with very high IQs might have compensated really well and be like really successful. But then something happens in their life, like they meet a crisis, a roadblock. Maybe they had received a lot of support from friends or family, and then this network dissolves, and up until that point, they've been compensating really well using their high IQ, and then all of a sudden their support network is removed, and they can no longer compensate. So again, their autism is essentially unmasked after going through setbacks such as the loss of family, and they begin to decompensate and then meet the criteria, potentially becoming impaired. So yeah, autistic personality then becomes more of a problem. So you wanted my thoughts on that. So yeah, I do think I guess potentially could happen. However, I would caveat that by saying that in these people, even in people who compensate really highly, there will still be a childhood history, because some people claim that their autism suddenly becomes manifest only after a setback and that they were perfectly fine before then. I don't think that's possible. Because autism is a developmental condition, there should always be a childhood history of some nature. Even in those who are really, really successful, there will still be some or successful relative to other autistics, there will still be some childhood signs, going back, because I don't think autism can be completely masked. Even if other people don't know it's autism, they'll still have noticed something, particularly in childhood, but might put it down to other things. But yeah, I think that for some very, very high functioning individuals, it's possible that if they've, say, got a very strong family network or very strong connections or whatever, they've got a high IQ, they're in a really good environment, they've then managed to kind of get shielded in a way from the worst of their difficulties, so they can appear to be less impaired than maybe they actually are. So their impairment is still there, it's just that it's kind of being shielded or scaffolded by other people, and then when that support network is no longer there, the impairment then becomes naked and obvious for all to see in a way that maybe it wasn't so obvious before, even though they wouldn't be able to completely mask it, because I don't think that's possible. It's just that, and then people might say, oh, they've become more autistic or whatever, when actually they haven't. It's just that what previously was supporting them and enabling, sort of covering up their difficulties, like maybe they had, I don't know, family who was doing all the organising for them and everything is no longer there, then it appears like they have more problems. Those problems were still there previously, it's just other people were taking care of them. So yeah, I agree that can happen, it's just that I don't think it changes how impaired they originally were. It's just that they were lucky enough to be in an environment that is extremely conducive to support their well-being. And I also suspect that it might also depend on where you are in society as well. So I can imagine, say if you're autistic but born in a really well-to-do rich family, okay, you don't need to rely on the state at all, you don't need to claim benefits, you are in a really rich family, so literally don't need to call on the state for anything. You don't need any involvement in social services. No, you can employ your own personal chalet. What do you call it? I don't know. Basically, your maid. I'm talking about really, really rich people. It's possible they don't even need a diagnosis. They might be just as impaired as, say, I am, but because they don't need to rely on a state or anything for anything, and because that's often the reason, isn't it, why people get diagnosed in the first place, is because they need support to help them to function. And maybe the only reason they might get a diagnosis is simply so that they can understand themselves better, or maybe more because, I mean, they might face relationship difficulties in their family that might cause stress, and so a diagnosis still might kind of help them. But they don't have quite such an existential need for a diagnosis in terms of accessing like help and ensuring they have an okay life, like with support, because they're already supported and they're rich enough to be able to like support themselves with their own money because they've got like loads and loads of money instead of needing to rely on the state or whatever. Yeah, in that case, I'm trying to think what I was saying. Yeah, they might be okay, but then you can also imagine a situation. Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is it can depend on the context of where you are in life, basically. And obviously, if you are extremely rich, you know, you might not experience autism as a disability in the same way as someone who isn't, because a lot of the disabling aspects of autism are taken care of. It's almost like those people don't have to face the disabling aspects of autism, because maybe they've got their own personal valet, or I don't know, they might even be able to have their own cook to make them food, or you know, if they can't cook, or you know, whatever. So they can then just sit in there, they can indulge a special interest to your arts content. Although, to be fair, if their autism is severe enough, they will still face it as a disability. I think even in that situation, you know, and that's obviously because I don't think it's 100% the social model. I draw upon a socio-medical model. I think that there will still be aspects of their autism that can't be ameliorated even if you are rich enough. You know, like you might find, you know, like relationship breakdowns, difficulties interacting with the people you employ and stuff like that. I don't know, but I'm just saying that obviously, like. These variables can influence to what extent autism can be compensated for and to what extent someone, might be able to get by in life, I suppose is what I'm saying. Anyway, thank you for watching.